following up on about God being a God of love, the scriptures say that, there is no greater love than a man lay down his life for his friend. And yet there are many documented instances where non-believers, especially during time of war, a buddy will fall on a grenade or something like that, give up his life for his friend. And yet, as a non-believer, how does one answer a person that says, how can this loving God send this individual to hell if he's a non-believer?
Yeah. Let me say something about that question before I answer it that's kind of interesting. I've been studying lately the doctrine of the atonement, and this has been a very rich study, the idea that Jesus died for us, as the New Testament says. And what some of the authors or commentators point out is that this was actually a very widespread motif in the ancient world. The idea of dying in the place of someone else because of your loyalty to a friend or your devotion to your husband. You were willing to give up your life in the place of another. One of the most famous examples of this in ancient Greek literature is Alcestis, a wife who was willing to die in the place of her husband so that he could continue to live and exert his proper reign and so forth. And she was held up as an example of nobility and courage in ancient Greek literature because of her willingness to die in the place of her husband. And some commentators I've read says they think this is actually what Paul has in mind when he talks about for a good man one might die, and for a righteous, or one might dare even to die for a righteous man. He may be they say that Paul may be thinking of Alcestis and this case in the ancient world. So it may well be the case that this idea of dying in the place of someone else is a motif that is very prominent in the ancient world, and one to which the gospel writers and Paul appeal to show how Jesus was willing to die in our place, but even greater in that he died not for a good man or a righteous man, but while we were enemies of God, he died for us. And that is unparalleled in the ancient world, that someone would give his life not for a good man or a righteous man, but for an ignoble man, an enemy. So that just kind of underlines a little bit of atonement theology with respect to Christ dying in our place. And as agonizing, again, emotionally as it is, to think that someone who would exhibit such great love as to die for another person could be separated from God forever, I think that what we have to say is that no one can earn salvation by works, that it is impossible to earn salvation. It is only by God's grace that when God judges the totality of one's life, if you irrevocably reject Christ out of your life, then you repulse the grace of God and you fall back on his justice. And as we said earlier, you know where you stand there. So even though the unbeliever may do this act of tremendous courage and good, it isn't as though that merits eternal life. If he is rejecting Christ, he is rejecting God's gracious provision for sin. He is rejecting the one who has died in his place, and therefore choosing to have to die himself. And that isn't unjust on God's part, because this is what every one of us really deserves. Salvation is by grace and not by works.